Hello all and welcome to RiskOut's webinar, BSA AML Decoded, Unpacking Transaction Monitoring. We are so excited to have you joining us here today. Now, before we dive into today's webinar content, let's roll through some quick housekeeping items. RiskOut will be sharing all of today's webinar resources, including the slides, handouts, and today's recording in a follow-up email, so be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. We also want this session to be as valuable for you as possible, so we encourage you to ask any questions that you may have throughout today's session in the questions section of the webinar panel on the side of your screen. We will also be running a few polls during today's webinar to better understand you as our audience, so your participation is greatly appreciated. RiskOut is a team of former bank examiners, BSA professionals, and fintech developers helping financial institutions grow and be more efficient and profitable. Through a full BSA AML suite and specialized market tools, RiskOut solutions increase revenue and decrease compliance costs by unlocking new deposit streams and automating compliance workflows. We are funded and influenced by over 200 financial institutions through the Launchpad Castle Creek Network, Bankers Helping Bankers Fund, and the Alloy Labs Network, and we are proud that 100% of our customers are referenceable. If you're interested in learning more, visit riskout.com and get in touch. Next month, we'll be hosting part 3 of this webinar series, BSA AML Decoded, Investigations and Case Management. In this session, we'll dive into your compliance team's detective work and how you piece together clues to combat financial crime within your communities. Our experts will break down investigation and case management strategies through real-life scenarios and experiences to help prepare your program. So this is a session you definitely won't want to miss. Visit riskout.com's resources section to reserve your seat for this exciting upcoming session. Today's webinar will be led by Ryan McInerny, RiskOut's Vice President of Product Strategy, and Brian Nowak, a Senior Solutions Executive here at RiskOut. Ryan brings a wealth of regulatory and technical experience to his role as a former national bank examiner with the OCC. At the OCC, Ryan was a member of the Northeast District Committees for Compliance and Commercial Credit, where he helped to identify changing industry trends and risk conditions. Brian Nowak has spent over a decade in regulatory compliance and internal audit roles, including working as a safety and soundness examiner for the Federal Reserve System. During his tenure at the Federal Reserve, he oversaw all aspects of examinations for both small and multi-billion-dollar financial institutions, while specializing in areas such as risk management practices, asset quality, earning performance, interest rate risk management products, liquidity, internal controls, and management information systems. We are so excited to have these two joining us here today. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and throw it over to our very capable experts. And Ryan, could you take us through today's agenda?
All right. So let's get started. Brian and I did want to take a quick deviation to start and just give a little background on how we ended up in BSA in the first place. So Brian, I'll let you take the lead.
Yeah, so I think it's important to state our why. And for me, my why is several years ago, my own mother was involved in elder abuse. She was the victim. And at the time, I did not know what elder abuse was. So that is where my shift from reading loans and being an asset quality guru and all that good stuff switched over into the BSA world. How about you, Ron?
For myself, when I was coming out of college, I thought I wanted to go into investment banking, foreign exchange, kind of every fancy buzzword. And so I took a job with some of those entities and decided that's not for me. So I decided I wanted to go to the FBI. I joined the OCC to get some experience with anti-money laundering, and it turned out that the banking side stuck a little bit more than the law enforcement side. So stuck around, and here we are.
Awesome, and we'd love to know your why one day. So we'll continue on. All
right, so today's roadmap, we're going to go a little bit over the background of transaction monitoring for those of you that are experienced in the BSA AML space. It's going to be kind of a walk in the park. But for those of you that might be a little bit new, should give you some context as to what this really means and why it's important. Then we'll run through some of the challenges, limitations of these systems, effective strategies for making your system a little bit better, refining that program. Apparently Brian doesn't like it. Refining that program, and then questions and answers. All right, so going straight into that background piece here. So what is transaction monitoring? Well, transaction monitoring is a review, continuous review of the transactions that are occurring at your financial institution. There's a couple of reasons that we want to be doing this. And so one of the main reasons is identifying potentially suspicious activity. And we don't do that just for fun. With the BSA and different regulations, we're trying to identify that potentially suspicious activity to identify and report on money laundering. And while we can achieve a lot of this manually, the idea behind transaction monitoring is to make it easier from a staffing perspective, easier to identify some of these things. And we'll go through a lot of how to make this work better for you, how to make it work better than if you were doing it from a manual perspective.
And for understanding transaction monitoring, since we have such a diverse group of attendees today, ranging from brand new into BSA all the way to the seasoned veterans, I figured I'd start out with maybe a little bit of a joke. Transaction monitoring is like a good mystery novel. Just when you think you've figured out who did it, a false positive throws you a plot twist. So going into understanding the transaction monitoring piece, the primary goal is to detect and prevent financial crimes such as money laundering and fraud. We all know that. But really, it's ensuring the regulatory compliance with the laws and regulations, and it's helping you manage your risks more effectively, protecting your own institution and your customers or members. And most importantly, maintains the institution's reputation by safeguarding against potential financial crimes. Did I miss anything, Ryan?
No, I nailed it.
No? Okay. Thought you would like that joke.
All righty, y'all. That takes us into our first poll question of the day, and that should be popping up on your screen right now. That question asks, oh, excuse me, I think that actually closed out for us. Let's see. Oh my goodness, that question closed a little too fast. Maybe we can all use our imaginations here on what we would have said. My apologies for that technical error on our side. But our question was asking just how confident are you in your institution's current transaction monitoring effectiveness? Now, Ryan, Brian, I won't make y'all pretend that we have results to go off here, but maybe y'all could speak to a little bit what you hear when you're talking to banks, credit unions out in the real world. Do they tend to be more on that very confident or very unsure side of the spectrum when it comes to the systems that they're using today?
Well, I think I'll take this. What I see the most is we all like what we've been using for so long, right? And we don't like change. And when we want to change something, such as going from a manual process to, say, automation, at first we might not like it, but once we see the results, they speak for themselves. Ryan?
Yeah, I'd say it. A lot of the times we're talking about those changes, it's been because there's something that has precipitated it. So whether that's been a change in total assets, so you having more work to do, or it's been a change in, say, staffing, maybe a change on the regulatory side, we're expected to do a little bit more review. And so I've seen when it gets to the much smaller institutions where they might be more comfortable on the manual side because they know their customers super well, and they can scan through the transactions and for the most part get the things they need to. But as they start to grow, maybe enter new markets, maybe a key person is retired, that's when it can be important to have some sort of transaction monitoring system that helps them. And so you see this like going from sure to unsure, particularly with staff changes and growth.
Awesome. And moving on to the essential components of transaction monitoring, flagging the suspicious activities. We know about the advanced algorithms and rule-based systems, but it's important, right? And the adjusting, right? So we're always making sure that not always making sure, but we're going to be refining those detection rules to minimize those false positives on your end to hopefully make your life a little easier. Identifying those false positives, ensuring the accuracy in reporting by reducing those false alerts is imperative. It's imperative for your sanity, and it's also imperative for your time. The case building for SARs, identify transactions that support regulatory filings, and then submitting SARs to FinCEN, which I know we all on this call love doing because the form is so great. But it's imperative to provide detailed information when you are submitting those SARs to help out enforce and to help out others. I'll put it that way. Ryan, what else could you add on this one? Because I know you've been working hard with the SAR form recently.
Yeah, I think with anything, transaction monitoring is meant to be kind of your first step in an investigation and ultimately the first step in a potential regulatory filing. So making sure that any alert that you're getting captures enough information for you to do a really kind of a thorough review of what's happening and are able to actually create some sort of report that is reflective of the behavior of that potential suspicious activity. Yeah, and continuing on that, when we think about the system in general, when you're starting to see these potentially suspicious actions, potentially suspicious activities, could be fraud, could be that money laundering, there's two really important items. One is the reasonable tunability of your system. So you should be able to kind of break stuff out in a way where the parameter sets, the rules you're using are appropriate for the customers or members they're being applied to. Big complaint we've heard in the past is, say, one size fits all rule set versus you have people and you have businesses and they behave totally different. And so now I might be able to tune my parameters, but because I can't break them out into groups, I'm getting too many false positives. And when we look at the alert side of things and the alert management, there should be, outside of your transaction monitoring system, you should have a process in place where these are being statused and reviewed in a reasonable amount of time. Particularly if you're having concerns, say, on the fraud side, or you're having concerns on things that require a more urgent review, having that process set up where you know who's doing what. Maybe it's one person's going through the queue and assigning to other people at the financial institution, but it's just as much a software issue as it is an internal process issue to do this the right way.
Alrighty, now before we dive too deep into these challenges and limitations, after we cover the basics, we want to know what challenges are facing you currently. This poll question should be up in front, and I promise I won't close it prematurely this time. It asks, what challenges do you face in your current transaction monitoring system? Now, you can select as many or as few responses as you'd like to. Your option choices here are too many false positives. Maybe you're missing some suspicious activity. Maybe there's just not enough staff to handle the alerts. Maybe you're having difficulty obtaining the necessary data when you do want to take a transaction into an investigation. Or maybe you're having a different challenge entirely that we just haven't captured here. We'll give you all just a couple more seconds to get your responses in before we let our experts speak to how this aligns to what they typically see. Alrighty, we already got most of our respondents in, so let's go ahead and share these results out. As you can see, there is an overwhelming majority here. I know Ryan just touched on this on our last slide, so not too surprising to see that 3/4 of our audience today is dealing with just too many false positives. That's followed pretty closely behind by difficulty obtaining the right data during those investigations, and then not enough staff to handle those. Only 19% of people feel that they're just missing suspicious activity, some of those false negatives, and then 9% of our audience is dealing with a different challenge entirely. I'll hide these results, and Ryan, I'd love to throw this over to you. How does this stack up to what you were expecting to see?
I don't know if you said Brian or Ryan.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll take either one.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. I think there's the two that are really interesting to me. The first one is difficulty obtaining the information you need for the review is super interesting. When you look at bank secrecy, anti-money laundering in general, and the disconnection from your ability to communicate with a customer or member, it can make it very difficult to get context for why an alert has happened. And then you're going to go through, say, a relationship manager or a branch manager or someone else to try and reach out to the customer or member. Maybe they're not interested in doing that, or the customer member is not interested in responding to them. So you get this disconnect where you can't get context from the person that's actually done the activity, and that probably would have cleared a lot up. So I always find that one super interesting, because when you can solve that problem and communicate with your customers and members directly, say from like a compliance email or whatever it is, you can get a lot more of that context and make it easier to do your investigation. On the false positive side, also really interesting, but I think a lot of that just comes down to limitations from a lot of systems not being able to scope into different groups of customers or members, where I could say this type of industry behaves this way, or this geography behaves this way, and now I can put my rules in line with that. When I can't do that and I just have this broad rule set with kind of one parameter set, not everyone's going to fit into that. Everyone has different behaviors. Or if I'm doing something, well, I can go down the rabbit hole on this and nobody wants me to do that. There's a lot of different ways to start to tune your parameter sets, and it's super important to do that, or you're going to have a ton of false positives. And it's unfortunate when some systems don't let you do that.
And if I could just add, and I don't want to steal the thunder from my slide that's upcoming here, is the staffing is a consistent theme across all FIs in any region. It's in almost any area of any community financial institution where they cannot find the right staff, right? I mean, you can find a human being for a particular position, but is that going to be the right fit for that individual? And I think it's worth noting that this is a trend that in my opinion, I've only seen is increasing as we find it very difficult to find talent for these community institutions.
That's great. Thank you both for your input on that. Thank you to all that participated. I will move us along here, but I will share, we did get one quick, more of a comment than a question, saying they appreciate your responses to that question, and they also appreciate Ryan's dog in the background, who's really bringing the best content. So I'll let us keep moving forward here.
I have this energy. As soon as we're done with the webinar, I'm going to do the same thing. So thinking about false positives, we just touched on it a little bit. I think some of the most important things to think about when we get to this slide is you're going to have false positives, no matter what system you use, and you should have false positives. When you tune a system just from an analytics perspective, or from, say, a machine learning perspective, whenever you tune any of these, you're going to have false positives, false negatives, true positives, true negatives. If I have no false positives, I've tuned way too far, and I'm probably missing some true positives. So there should be something in there. It's almost impossible not to have them. But if we think about a solution to reducing false positives in the first place, having a system where you're able to tune your parameters, as I'm kind of gonna really just nail over the head like 50 times during this presentation, is going to be spending some time up front on that tuning, making sure you have the appropriate groups for those parameters to be set on. That's how you minimize false positives. And you can work with your vendor, you can do that yourself. There's a lot of different options there, but it does require some upfront effort to make sure it's going to work the right way. When we think about data integrations, we had a whole PowerPoint presentation on this about technology at, I want to say it was one of the CUNA events, and this was back in October. We're talking about why is it so difficult for you to get information from your core, from different sources, to your third-party vendors. And it's a lot of mapping. It's a big mapping exercise. And so if you start trying to map all these different sources to different vendors, you do it over and over again, you can even have data integrity issues where something might not be coming over in the correct way. So how do you get all of your information into one place? Is that possible? It is to an extent. Maybe it might be a bit of a pipe dream. Sometimes with some of these larger fintech banks, you see them piping a lot of this out into a data warehouse, and then using that unified data warehouse to feed some of the vendors. It's probably a bit heady for what we're actually talking about here, but in the future, I could imagine a lot of that happening for financial institutions. But when we think about solutions for these data integrations, which there is one, if we hit the, API-based solutions, batch-based solutions, you can pull information into these singular hubs. And depending on what the vendor's requirements are, so say, for example, what do we do? Like at RiskOut, we have a schema that we map to. And so we have information coming from different sources to this one single map of what we require for data. If you have different vendors that have that sort of requirement, you can use that, or you can map from the vendors to your own source and put it all together there and then give it out to people. This deserves an entire presentation by itself, so I apologize if that's a little bit confusing, but it is possible, sometimes a little difficult.
And if I could just add on that, with all of the recent consolidation, garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, so if the data is wrong, it's going to create a nightmare, and I'm sure some of these attendees on here have already experienced that. So just wanted to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, super important.
Oh, this is mine. How could I have forgotten? So instead of going right into it, since we just talked about it a few slides ago on the polling question, I'm going to give you another joke. Why did the compliance officer bring a ladder to work? Because they wanted to reach the high thresholds. Well, that was a good one. So going into here, this is a sensitive subject, right? I mean, because the resources are very limited, right? You either can't find the staff, you might be able to find the staff, but they require training. And typically what happens is you're just wearing multiple hats. We've been there, we've done that. Is it effective? Is it cost effective? What about from an efficiency standpoint? So for these things, we have an issue with these resources, but it can get better if we move from, say, something that's manual over to automation, right? Ethan, could you click on that solution? So the big thing for here is when it comes to your higher risk customers, the best thing to do is automate their processes for these high risk customers, so you can capture the data correctly, you can monitor them correctly, and it's a huge time saver. Ryan, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, there was, for those of you that are on the founders list where we send out these kind of updates on what we're building, I think one of them, I don't know if Ethan made me pull this line out, but I wrote something about like the death of the tickle monster, and really that was about like death of tickler systems. And when you look at the amount of time tickler systems can take up, if you're having to go out and gather all this stuff over and over again, there's areas where you can save yourself time that might not be, say, like your transaction monitoring system. But if you can get time back in other places and apply that to where time is being sucked, say in transaction monitoring, sometimes it's looking outside of the immediate problem to solve the immediate problem.
Thank you. And then for manual monitoring, for the specific transaction types, you probably already know this, but focus in on the large cash amounts and foreign transactions. For your manual review, involve reviewing the your MIS or your vendor reports for unusual activity. For your review processes, combine your daily and periodic reports that are going to be tailored to your institution's risk profile. And then, some of the common reports that we see, which I'm sure you're seeing on an average day, is your currency activity, funds transfer, monetary instruments, large items, significant balance changes, and then your ATM and NSF reports. While you're, make sure you're utilizing that in order to properly monitor. I'm sure I missed something that I think Ryan's going to add, but if not, we can move on.
I'd say all I'd add here is a lot of institutions that are not using a formal transaction monitoring system. It is this kind of like report pull and then review that report. Sometimes that can work just as effectively as transaction monitoring could. So it's always a balance of deciding, is manual right for me right now? Is a full system right for me right now? I think the biggest things to think about are business continuity. If that manual process is totally in someone's head, that can be a little dangerous. That's where some of the benefits of software can come into play. And then one of the other ones would be is if there's new patterns, new practices, new things that you should be looking for, make sure you're being updated on that if you're going to continue using manual. Sometimes vendors that have these systems will be looking for that and adding it in. If you're not using a vendor, there's different sources, like if you were to go into like CBank or different bank or credit union groups that are talking about this, just try and be apprised of what's happening if you're going to stay in the manual way.
Yeah, just know from an efficiency standpoint. I mean, if you really track it, it might shock you on how long it takes you to do certain items.
Yeah. I think an interesting one here on real-time monitoring is we hear a lot where people will come and they'll say, yeah, what we want is real-time monitoring. And so they say, yeah, there's a solution that has real-time monitoring. But then let's take Actimize, for example. Actimize is a really impressive system. It does a ton. It has real-time. It's also probably very unattainable for community banks under a few billion. And the reason for that is when we think about doing real-time monitoring, do you have the resources to set that integration up? Do you have the resources to then monitor it at that pace? And so sometimes while real-time monitoring might be a feature of the solution, it might not be a feature that's attainable with the current technology stack that your financial institution has. So if this is something you're looking at and you're starting to ask vendors questions about this, you should also be asking your IT team whether or not you can support it or not. Because if you're paying for a feature that you can't actually use, if you're giving information on a batch cadence to a system that would have real-time monitoring, you're getting real-time at the time of your batch. So this one is huge to think about, not only from the vendor perspective, but from the perspective of what you can feasibly deliver to the vendor. Is this one me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is we're looking at if you were monitoring a new customer, a new member. Let's say your branch, your bank, credit union, whatever it is, just got a new person in. You're trying to decide how to monitor them. And so since they're a new customer or a new member, you don't have any transaction activity. You don't have any idea of what their historical norm is. And so what we've seen in the past is they might automatically just get sent up to say some risk level or whatever is happening there. It's just kind of defaulting into something. But in reality, you know, they live close. They're part of, say, a company that's kind of like the main company in town. So you have some verification of their employment. But if you're just starting off, how do we make sure that we know how to monitor them? One approach that we've seen is elevating the stringency of their transaction monitoring alerts a little bit. So there's going to be some that aren't going to work, right? If you have rules that are based on, say, standard deviation, where standard deviation is going to be calculating deviation from the norm, there's no norm. So there's going to have to be some sort of balance on those rules. The system should really have a default, and if that person behaves outside of what that default would be, then it's going to trigger. And then the second piece would be if they would typically be low risk, maybe you have them in moderate risk for 3 months while that history is developed. And then once the history is developed, they fall back into low risk. And then it's going to be their activity that would have to push them into a higher risk category. But it's really a partnership of the risk score plus the transaction monitoring. So usually for new accounts, I'm going to score their risk higher. By scoring their risk higher, I would have more stringent transaction monitoring thresholds. So for example, say my rule is, let's say wire deviations or something like that. For low risk, maybe it's a deviation of 1 standard deviation. For medium risk, it's 2. For high risk, or sorry, the other way. For low risk, it's 3 standard deviations. For medium, it's 2. For high, it's 1. But I'm tiering this based on the risk level of the customer member. And account age could be a factor in my risk score. Man, some of these you guys let me go way too far in the weeds.
I had to let you go on that one, Ryan. So strategies for effective monitoring. So you got that new customer, or member. So now what do? You're going to conduct the thorough risk assessment that I know that you always do when the account is open. You're going to gather as much information as possible during the onboarding process, because we all know that gaining that information is a lot easier during the onboarding process than it is down the road. You're going to adjust your thresholds, right? So set higher or more flexible thresholds to reduce those false positives. Tighten them as the transaction history is built, right? So give it some seasonality. Your EDD, definitely apply those EDD measures for your higher risk customers, even if the account is new. I think that's might be known, right? And then update your customer members' risk profile based on the ongoing transaction activity after the account has been established. Regular reviews. So if you're doing this manual, I know it can be a little bit of a pain sometimes, but you really want to be more frequent on your reviews for new accounts. And then obviously utilize those reviews to adjust your risk ratings appropriately based off of the information. And really leverage your technology. So, we utilize machine learning that, we at RiskOut have, but I don't want to give a plug yet for RiskOut, but just utilize what's at your disposal now. And hopefully that will allow you to effectively monitor. If not, give us a call.
I think one thing to quickly add there, there is such a thing as over configuration. So if you look at a lot of data science programs, analytics programs, say like at universities, they'll do these competitions where people will tune a model based on training data, and then they try and get the most accurate result when they apply that model to a test. And so they won't have the test ahead of time. So they have to train everything on the data they have, and then they apply the model they trained on some new data, and they see who's the most accurate on that new data. If they have trained on the test data too rigorously, where they've gone way too far in, it's going to be training in deviations. And so then as a result, when I put it onto my test, when I actually execute the algorithm I've written, it's going to be very inaccurate. So I only want to go in so far on some of this stuff. If you tune like each person individually, it's gonna take you way too much time, and it's also not going to work very well.
That's a great call out. Thanks for that, Ryan. That does bring us to our third poll question, which you should see popping up on your screen now. And that asks, how often does your institution update its transaction monitoring rules? You can be honest here. This is anonymous. We won't share your name with the rest of the audience, but your answer is monthly, quarterly, annually, as needed, or never. Some systems out there are a little strict about when or how you can actually update those rules. So sometimes it's out of your hands entirely there. So we'll give you all just a couple more seconds to get these responses in before we turn them around and see how they stack up to what our experts were expecting. And Ryan, while we're letting these people get their answers in, do you know what channel that standard deviation test was on? I'm not sure I get the NFL anymore, so I'd love to be able to watch a little competitive transaction monitoring. I think that'd be excellent.
You joke about that, but there's I think there's a series called Model Off that you can actually watch people competitively build models for time and accuracy.
Wow, that's pretty great. I think that might be some of the only kind of models that our team has. So I'll have to check that out. You guys should be able to see these responses up on your screen now. The majority, 65% of our audience, is updating their transaction monitoring rules as needed. That's followed by just about a quarter of our respondents saying annually at 24%. Our bottom three options there are monthly and quarterly, which are tied at 3%, and never, which is at 6%. Brian with a B, let me ask you, how does this stack up to what you're anticipating seeing here?
I was kind of surprised on the 65% as needed. Annually, is aligned with what I was estimating, but I think it's pretty aligned. 6% for never. I mean, that doesn't surprise me that much.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I will say, as needed, of course, maybe that's every week, maybe that's every month. Of course, it depends. But to Ryan's point, there is such thing as too much. As if we're tinkering every day, maybe that can trip us up in its own fashion. So thank you all for sharing those responses, and I'll throw it back over to our experts here to dive into some key strategies.
Awesome.
Brian, one thing I do want to add real quick on the timing. I bet as needed makes sense because it's probably in line with back testing, and the back testing could be done quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. That's the only, because that's when you would do it, is if you do a back test and you see something that's off, and then you change it. Because maybe I do my back test annually and it's not off, and so I don't change it. Just my 2 cents.
No, I like it. So let me ask you this, Ryan. Why did the compliance officer sit on a thumbtack?
Why is that
on point with transaction monitoring? Awesome. So as we continue on here for effective monitoring, regularly updating and calibrating your monitoring system to align with current threats is imperative. I put this in here. It's like updating your antivirus software, crucial to staying ahead of the game. Be a good little commercial or an ad. And then the risk-based approach, I think we hear it all the time, but incorporate a risk-based approach tailored to your institution's risk profile. Know your weak spot, know where your weak spots are, and continue to strengthen them, because as we all know, it's never a perfect system and it's never a perfect day. We're always trying to improve.
So for reviewing and evaluating, in this context, we're talking about the actual alerts that are being developed by the transaction monitoring system. I think something to think about here is when an alert is generated, there's typically 2 stages of review. There's your first stage where you're marking it basically as this requires an investigation or this is a false positive. And so at that point, you'd probably elevate to a full investigation, or you just kind of throw that alert out into purgatory and no one's ever going to look at it again. In that initial review, you're probably taking a look at what's standard behavior for this customer member, what industry are they in, kind of gaining some context as to why would this potentially have happened. And then if I can clear it, then I'm good. If with my first, say like 15, 20 minutes of looking at this, I still don't really know what's happening, that's probably when I'm elevating this to an investigation. And when I'm doing a full investigation, that's basically I'm preparing to decide whether this is a SAR or a no SAR. And then I'm probably pulling in more and more contextual information. Maybe I'm reaching out to a relationship manager, a branch manager, or something else to get some information or context around this customer member, so I can make a decision on whether to file a suspicious activity report or not on them.
And then for your independent review, the rule of thumb or regulation states you're going to want to get this independently reviewed every 12 to 18 months to ensure that you're staying on top of the necessary changes that would be needed. Not sure what else to add on here, Ryan. I think independent review is self-explanatory.
Yeah, I mean, well, we both did a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important that you're doing 2 types of independent review. You're having your model validations, making sure the thing is working mathematically, it's pulling the right information from different sources. And then sometimes you could have a third party come in and just verify that the tuning is correct, but that one could be independent. That could be also performed internally with your back testing.
Now, Ryan, in your experience, when it comes to these third-party reviews, are you consistently seeing the same company come in to do that independent review, or are you seeing a change?
That's a right, as a regulator, when you go in places and you see, oh, it's been the same auditor for 10 years, or it's or any of those sort of things, it can be helpful to change that up. Some of these, it might be the same company over and over. I think it depends on the potential risk there and the potential for a relationship to get in the way of accurate results. For model validation, things like that, you can probably leverage one company. Maybe you get uncomfortable with them at some point. Maybe they're hiking their prices on you. Maybe it's a good time to change. For your audit itself, it's typically to change that up once in a while. But I mean, I've seen banks and credit unions that do that for same auditor for like 10, 20 years. It's kind of a beauty's in the eye of the beholder there.
Awesome. So moving on to refining your program. So for this one, this is a case study where I spoke with Justin Timberlake Bank. I'm sorry, we'll call it ABC Bank. How about that? Spoke to ABC Bank in the Midwest. They're a $250 million institution. For BSA, there's really two people. It's their COO and then the assistant. So that COO wears many hats. They have a manual process. It's Excel driven. It's inefficient. Everything is manual, but they have satisfactory exam results and audit results. So the question on here is, if this was you and at your institution and you have a manual process, but you want automation and you know that it's not going to cost an arm and a leg, what would be some of those questions that you would want to ask, or not necessarily ask, but what are some of the key data and information that you should provide to your leadership team? And some of those things are going to be, how many transactions did you process monthly and annually? For your false positive rates, what percentage of your alerts were false positive? How much time is being spent on your manual reviews, and be honest on them? What are the potential risks and regulatory penalties that are associated with your current system? Whether you like it or not, what would they be? And then what would be that initial and ongoing cost of implementing an advanced monitoring system? So you would have your one-time fee and your annual fee. Well, what would that cost be in order to provide to your leadership team? And then what specific improvements would you see in efficiency, accuracy, and compliance that can be expected from automation? And in my opinion, and I'm sure Ryan might have a few other things, but in my opinion, that's going to give you the groundwork that's necessary in order for you to go to your leadership team and present this to them in a way where we've been doing it manual. It's been satisfactory, but we know regulators are coming in and doing exams and asking maybe some questions that they didn't do at the prior exam. So this is how much it would be, and this is all the information in order to do automation. Anything else that they should touch on there, Ryan?
I think there's two things I'd think of. So one, just anecdotally from my experience, I was an examiner out of the Northeast when I was working mid-sized community bank supervision, so we covered all of New England. And so our exposure to, say, BSA AML was very much informed by that New England activity. We had this examiner come in from Miami. He joined our field office. Don't think he understood what the weather was like up there yet, so he definitely regretted that. But then when he went in on some of these exams to the banks that had been being regulated by my office, he had some different insights, some different things to take a look at. So as soon as the staffing composure of your office begins to change, or they bring somebody else in, what was satisfactory for one office might actually not be the same for someone that has different perspective. And that, whether that's fair or not, because I think standardization is probably ideal, that can cause some problems. The other piece is when you look at trying to staff typically high skill employees for this sort of stuff, if you're growing, it can be easier to get a software and increase the efficiency of the people you have already than it would be to find and train somebody new to come in. So just my 2 cents on those. Okay, AI and machine learning, I think I have beat to death so far, but I'll add a couple of things in here. So some of the other things I think are really interesting with how this is applied to your transaction monitoring systems. I'll start with one, which is clustering. So clustering is a methodology for identifying like customer or member types. So you see a pattern or practice of behavior, you group those people together and you say, archetype A behaves in this way. And then when there's a difference from that behavior pattern, that's when it would be flagged. So that's probably going to actually lead to a ton of false positives, but it's really interesting. So I think in the future, it could be more effective in some of these transaction monitoring systems. I think sometimes we get excited about the potential for it, we shove it all in, and then we're stuck dealing with the results from it. It's actually a fun fact how Netflix decides what is popping up on your suggested feed is with a clustering mechanism. The better application, in my opinion, is when you take these supervised learning approaches where you have a rule-based system and then you use machine learning to tune those parameters in. So as opposed to trying to create rules out of thin air, a lot of bankers, a lot of people that are working at credit unions in any financial services space have seen money laundering for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it might be, and they have an idea of what that can look like. So partnering that real life experience with something that can help you hone in the parameters can give you the best result. So when you've seen in the past AI play chess, AI versus a person will usually win. But when you had AI partnered with, say, a grandmaster, the combination of the two did better than the person or the AI. So I would never say just let machine learning, let AI do a lot of this stuff, but using it to enhance your own abilities can be a really strong application for it. Anything to add there, Brian? I know it's...
I was going to ask you a question just because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, but what is, if you had to pick one, what would be most effective, AI or machine learning, and why?
So machine learning, you're typically using as a methodology to just kind of like iterate over something again, until you get like your most accurate result from it. AI is typically going to be using a lot of different sources to either like try and come up with something if I've like let it go off on its own in an unsupervised perspective, or I might be using it to like query a bunch of things, like when we think about gathering information from, say, like Google or from I don't know, like anywhere. That's, I think, how we typically think of the word AI. I mean, ML is technically a type of AI, so ML, I think, is more appropriate for what we are trying to do. But you get like a chatbot or something that can help you to answer questions or pull up information from regs, that can be a good use for AI. It's different applications.
Interesting.
Okay. So what does this look like in practice? I will stop rambling on all these things. So for rules-based systems, identify transactions deviating from predefined rules and queue those alerts for review. For alert handling, immediate status updates, clear rationale for alerts, and include some information on the customer profile, member profile, bring that context in. And then on the parameter setting, you want that to be customizable. We recommend setting that up with the ability to tune parameters for different groups. And then if there's an opportunity for it in the systems that you're using, if you can work in, say, seasonality and some of those, you can reduce false positives from those fluctuations, say like with a farmer, where all their cash comes in half the year.
All righty, y'all. Thank you for that. Now, before we do transition over into the question and answer portion of our webinar, I do want to take a quick moment to speak about RiskOut's new comprehensive BSA AML solution. Ryan McInerny and his team have been working tirelessly to develop an innovative and some intuitive ways to solve some of the common industry challenges that we find in the realms of risk scoring, transaction monitoring, onboarding and due diligence, SAR and CTR filing, case and investigation management, and much, much more. And I am very excited to share that we are officially ready to demo our solution. If you would like to join us in taking the BS out of BSA, you can request a demo either by going to riskout.com, or we will also have a survey that will follow up this webinar, and you can request it there. So if you want to see a little bit more of Ryan and Brian, I'm sure they would be over the moon to show you a quick demonstration. Now, we do have one final poll question that will be popping up on your screen now. And that question is completely optional. It asks if you would be interested in speaking with RiskOut about any of the following. You can choose as many or as few of those responses as you'd like. And while we do have this poll question up, I do encourage anyone to ask any questions that they might have or have had throughout the webinar. You guys can go ahead and submit those in the questions tab of that GoToWebinar panel. We've got a couple more minutes here at the end of our time to respond to any of those, give any advice that we can. And as always, if we don't have enough time, or if this is something that just requires a little bit additional deep dive, we're happy to follow up with y'all offline after today's session. All right, thank you all so much. And let's go ahead and dive into our Q&A. We had a question that came up. Ryan, you had a slide that was speaking about having more stringent rules for new members or customers that come into a bank or credit union. How do you actually apply that? Do you have a set of rules that's just built for kind of those new individuals, and then you transition them over at a certain point? What does that look like in practice?
Okay, so that's really going to depend on the system you're using. I'll give an example of how we would do it, and then I'll give an example of how you might do it elsewhere. So for us, account age is a factor in the risk score. And so typically a new account is going to bump that individual up into a new risk category. And then our transaction monitoring rule sets are broken out into person versus business. And then underneath person versus business, they're broken into low, medium, and high. And so if you had a person that was low versus a person that was medium, you're going to have more stringent alerting on the medium risk person. And as a result, you'll have more alerts that are coming in because the thresholds are more sensitive. If I was using a system that wasn't doing it like that, one methodology could be creating a rule set for new accounts. That would be probably pretty difficult because you're not actually contextualizing it to the type of activity that the customer or member might have, say if they're a business or an individual. So you could tune into a cluster or groups that are like occupation or geography, or you could do, say, new account persons, new account businesses, rule sets, if you have the ability to do that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And again, if you do want to dive a little bit deeper or maybe get some hands-on assistance, we have a lot of great people on our team like Brian and Ryan that are more than happy to assist. We had another question that came in, and that asked, is there a recommended ratio of false positives that I should have in my system? It feels like I have too many, but I don't want to lower too far. That's a common thing we hear. I know we saw not only that people are struggling with false positives, but also those false negatives. How would you all recommend that they deal with it?
Personally, I think you'd want to do that by rule. If you look at the false positive rate for every single one of your rules, like as a whole, that might not be reflective of what you want to see and what you don't want to see. But for example, when we were testing our wire rule, this was a couple months back, and one of our staff, Nina, was looking through the alerts that were being generated, and she's like, yeah, that's false positive, but I wanted to look at it because it has the characteristics of what could potentially be an issue. And so sometimes there's just going to be these false positives that no matter what you want to see, but there might be a different type of rule. Maybe it's the structuring rule, and you're getting a ton of false positives on that. But if you had reduced, say, the amount of days that structuring was being conducted over, then you reduce those false positives. So I would start rule by rule, and then those ratios are going to vary by the rule. If you have questions about that or you want to talk about it, always just feel free to shoot me an email. It's ryan@riskscout.com, and I can provide some sort of ideas on how to do that more specifically to the situation.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've got their contact information up on the screen now if you do want to follow up with any of that. I think we got time for one more question here, if that works for y'all. We had a question asking, are there any good recommendations for independent program reviews? They haven't been satisfied with their current provider and are interested in making a switch and not sure where to go first.
I think that's going to depend a lot about region, but I know, Brian, do we have any partners on that?
Yeah, we do have some partners, and it would be a conversation that we could take offline, and I can provide you with a few resources that you could reach out and see which one you like.
Yeah, I can think of some that I would have seen in the Northeast. I just don't know if they'd be the appropriate name for the situation. So yeah. Shoot Brian and I an email. We can connect you with whoever's right for the area.
Awesome. Well, awesome, y'all. Thank you all so much. Again, we do not have any more time for today, but I do want to give a big thank you to both Brian and Ryan for sharing their expertise with us today. Y'all go ahead and keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending out today's recording, the slides, and we've got 3 handouts for you today. We'll be sending all of that into your inbox this week for your convenience. After today's session, when you guys close out today, there will be a brief survey. That's a good way for us to get some feedbacks and if y'all have any topic requests for future webinars. So we appreciate y'all taking a moment to share your thoughts there. As always, if you do have any additional questions, if you want to learn more about RiskScout, or if you just want to stop by and say hi, please don't hesitate to visit us here at riskscout.com. We hope to see you all on our next webinar, and thank you again to Ryan and Brian for spending some time with us today. You'll have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you.